They had always said it couldn't happen. The monarch is the calm in the eye of the storm, ceremonial, dignified, a bridge between past and present. Yet in our story, a live broadcast begins like any other. The king at a national address, a crowd hushed, cameras framing a measured face. Then, unlike any recorded script, he leans forward and speaks with a clarity that floors the nation. The phrase lands like a bell. Sharp, moral, unforgiving. For viewers in America who remember historic national ruptures, Nixon's resignation, Reagan's survival, the many times a leader's words reframed a country's direction, the sensation is similar. You feel the ground shift under your feet before anyone can say why. And in that moment, the Prime Minister's image begins to crack. We must ask, what pushes a figure bound by custom to break that custom? In our narrative, he is not impetuous. He is moved by a long accumulation of public pain. Hospitals stretched thin, communities neglected, a sense that moral responsibility has been eroded by expedience. The king speaks not to attack, but to name a failure. For older viewers who prize restraint and protocol, this is almost biblical. The elder rises to call the community back to its promises. The palace speech becomes more than a headline. It is a moral mirror held up to a nation. Pause. Yet those who wield power rarely welcome mirrors. Cut to the corridors behind the cameras. The Prime Minister, once composed, hears the words and feels something that is not just political. It is personal. Phones ring in muted rooms, advisors clutch briefing sheets as if they're talismans, and the man at the center of it all moves through a world that suddenly looks unfamiliar. For many of you who lived through turbulent political seasons in the U.S., there's something intimately recognizable here, the sudden private panic that public life rarely reveals. As the Prime Minister steps toward a microphone to make his own statement, the nation holds its breath. What will he say to stop the tide? He chooses calm. His words are careful, legalistic, soothing. He speaks of service, of duty, of the deeds that remain unfinished. But in moments like this, language that comforts rational minds often fails human hearts. The public, watching with teacups and tuned radios, with decades of civic memory, senses the gulf between a statement syntax and the raw need for moral accountability. Calm can be strength. Calm can be camouflage. The cameras cut between the statement and the king's earlier words, and that juxtaposition becomes a living argument everyone can see, authority versus conscience. As pundits begin to parse those two images, the public divides. In an age of instant news, papers and networks race to brand the moment. Tabloid type screams scandal. Broadsheets try dignity and analysis. For older viewers who grew up with a morning paper at breakfast, the new media is a strange hybrid. Midnight headlines, rolling updates, and the paper's sober lead all collapsing into a single public mood. Editors, once slow and deliberative, now must choose, inflame or inform. Their choice ripples through living rooms, pubs, and prayer groups. Somewhere a veteran editor makes a decision that will shape the national memory of this hour. A newsroom senior editor, hair silvered and eyes steady, chooses restraint. He asks reporters to verify before they publish, to look for evidence beyond rhetoric, to ask whether moral outrage should be amplified yet again. That choice, which may seem small in the flash of a broadcast storm, keeps a measure of civic sanity alive. For your audience, who remember when journalistic restraint was a professional religion, this is a small victory. The recognition that facts are not footnotes to drama but the stage upon which it ought to be judged. But even a restraint can only hold so long before politics intrudes. Behind closed doors, alliances strain. Cabinet ministers whisper, backbenchers look at exit ramps. Political loyalty is not the same as moral conviction. Once the latter overtly crosses into public view, the former frays. This is the hour when ambitious colleagues, who once whispered support in private, now calculate survival. For voters of a certain age, this is painfully familiar. The friend who turns while the ship lists. Power tests everything, and the human heart is revealed by its choices. Who will step forward to defend the Prime Minister, and who will quietly step away? Shift from Westminster's marble to a northern town's council hall. A nurse who's worked double shifts speaks quietly into the camera. We needed leadership that cared. A retired teacher remembers promises unkept. These are not viral soundbites. They are human ledger entries, the small unpaid debts of governance that accumulate into public anger. For our American viewers, recall the face of a town where factories closed, a community where institutions failed people who depended on them. That face registers the king's words and sees them as validation of a long-simmering grief. And those human stories will become the most persuasive evidence in the days ahead. Opposition leaders smell opportunity. They sharpen speeches and pick their moments with ruthless precision. But the drama is delicate. Rushing to exploit royal rebuke risks looking opportunistic, and voters resent naked ambition. So they calibrate. Questions in Parliament, motions that hint, op-eds that sting. For viewers who have watched political seasons unfold in the U.S., this is the advanced calculus of crisis. Timing matters as much as content. Will the opposition find traction, or will the public recoil from perceived opportunism? Within a day, polling numbers tremble. Approval ratings dip. The trust metric slides like ice. Older citizens watching will remember how quickly public sentiment can pivot. A line in the sand becomes a cliff's edge. Pollsters scramble for sample sizes, pundits for explanations. But numbers are human stories disguised as graphs. The real movement isn't statistical. It's the speech at bus stops, the comment in the church foyer, the tear wiped away at kitchen tables. And behind those numbers, a speechwriter works through the night. A letter surfaces, handwritten, private, never meant for cameras, that once praised the Prime Minister's character. It circulates, then fractures public attention. Some defend the man, others suspect the letter was strategic. The letter becomes a symbol for something deeper. The tension between the performative gestures of power and the private acts that make leadership human. For viewers who prize character above style, this scene is a reminder that reputations are welded from small acts and public tests. Yet reputation is fragile. It can be renewed or ruptured by a single new revelation. Lawyers appear on panels, parsing what the king's words mean in constitutional terms. There's a quiet, rigorous explanation for viewers who love the mechanics of governance. The monarch's voice is moral, not legal. The Prime Minister remains the holder of executive power, but political legitimacy springs from public confidence. For our American audience, steeped in constitutional debate, this is an instructive parallel. A nation's rules matter, but so does the unwritten contract of trust. Meanwhile, an internal inquiry is quietly discussed. Leaks are the oxygen of modern politics. An anonymous memo, a private text, a time-stamped email, any of these can reshape a narrative. In our drama, a leak surfaces suggesting key meetings were mismanaged, timelines altered. Allies say it's conspiratorial. Critics say it's what they always suspected. For older viewers who remember the slow drip of Watergate or the rapid cascade of modern scandals, leaks are a habitual test. Does the truth emerge messy and human, or does it get buried in spin? A critical witness prepares to speak. A former aide, trembling, agrees to an interview. Not for fame, but because conscience outweighs fear. Their account is specific, mundane, and therefore credible. A meeting, a misremembered promise, a deferred commitment. The human details cut through rhetoric. For viewers attuned to the moral interior of public life, this is crucial. People who work side by side know more than cameras ever will. The witness's testimony wrenches a new frame onto the story. one that is less about policy and more about stewardship. Parliament schedules a session. The chamber is packed. Cameras sweep the faces of MPs whose careers are built on rhetoric and survival. Questions are sharp. Answers are thinner. For those who love the theater of democracy, this is classic scene-making, leaders tested under lights. For citizens, it's where power either legitimizes itself or reveals its fault lines. The session yields no instant resolution, but it produces a decisive image. The Prime Minister, composed yet weary, fielding questions that will echo for months. Outside, a crowd gathers. Outside Parliament, a crowd assembles that is not merely chanting slogans. There are banners and anger, yes, but also old women with placards that read simple things: dignity, care, honesty. It's important to picture real people, not caricatures. Men who fix machines for 40 years, nurses whose nights are shorter than their paychecks, grandparents who worry for their grandchildren's futures. Their presence is moral pressure translated into public form. For our American audience, this is the heart of civic life. Neighbors who show up when institutions wobble. A familiar voice from the past steps forward to ask for calm. A retired judge, a figure of public trust, steps to a microphone and asks for patience and process. He reminds the nation of the virtues of deliberation. His voice pierces the noise precisely because it is not partisan. For those of you who remember civic leaders whose reputations outlived political cycles, the elder's plea is grounding. It recenters the argument on principles rather than ratings. Cries for immediate punishment fade in the face of his words. But respect cannot halt momentum forever. Inside the Prime Minister's own party, fractures appear. A line of MPs privately advocates for change. Others rally around the leader, recalling a record of service. The party's internal debate is not a secret coup but a democratic process in microcosm, a reminder that parties are coalitions of conscience and interest. For American eyes, this is recognizable. When a leader's base doubts, the political body enters a dangerous liminal space. The Prime Minister calls for unity. The party answers with silence and strategy. A senior minister resigns. A minister's resignation letter is brief but devastating. Praise for service, regret for failing standards, an implicit critique that reads like thunder. Resignations carry theater because they are both personal and public, a moral statement framed as an administrative step. For viewers who remember key resignations that changed history, this is a high drama beat. A small piece of paper can tilt an entire government's momentum. The Prime Minister must now decide whether to fight on or step aside. Late in the night, in a small office, the Prime Minister speaks with a trusted confidant, someone who remembers old days of earnest politics. They speak not in sound bites but in human terms. The children they raised, the promises they made, the cost of staying on versus stepping down. It is a scene of private vulnerability that public life rarely reveals. For older viewers, there is a tenderness here. Leaders are human, and choices are moral as much as strategic. Dawn will bring a decisive announcement.